We started very strongly yesterday, and we're ending very strong. Couldn't be more delighted to welcome a gentleman here on stage with whom I've had the pleasure of already being on stage a couple of years ago at the Munich Security Conference when he was Prime Minister of Belgium. And I'm equally delighted to welcome him now in his brand new position as the new administrator of the UNDP. Delighted to welcome Alexander De Croo, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Back then I said Prime Minister. Now, if it's okay, I'll say Alexander.
That's much better. Administrator really does not sound right.
That's what I figured. It doesn't roll off the tongue quite easily.
No, not at all. Hey, the joke was that before there were two administrators, the one of UNDP and the one of USAID.
I see.
Unfortunately, I'm the only one left now.
Yeah, administrator. Administrator sounds very bureaucratic indeed.
It kind of is. Yeah.
Yes, not as fancy as the job title.
Not to hide that the UN has a certain level of bureaucracy, but okay, that's.
Well, there you have. That's perhaps for another discussion. But we are very, very happy that you're here. I know you have a packed schedule, and very grateful to you that you took time out of your busy schedule, Alexander. Of course, before we get into the nuts and bolts of your job and of the importance of development, you, as I said, you're a former prime minister, you're a former politician, and you're very good at reading the room and knowing about what the nature of the discussions here at the Munich Security Conference are and what they mean. What is your reading right now of what is taking place, the tone, the sentiment, and the messages?
Maybe let's compare last year with this year.
Yeah.
Because in a year a lot of things have happened.
Indeed.
I think that first of all, what you see is the development discussion was really a bit a sideshow at Munich Security Conference. Yes, we were tolerated, but not much more than that. I think now it is actually really part of the discussion, and we'll go more in detail in your further questions, but the discussion about how you secure the world, how you stabilize the world, more and more people understand that if you only do the military part of it, or only the repressive part of it, or only the curative part of it, you're missing a big part of it, and you actually often perpetuate the instability. So that is one big change. I think another one is, yes, last year there was the J.D. Vance speech, which I think really caught the Europeans by surprise. What you see now is, I think, the evolution of European thinking, but also European work over a period of 1 year, where you see that there is a clear answer of the European countries, which is basically, look, we understand we have to invest more, but also respect us in the uniqueness that we have, but it's not hostile towards the United States. It's actually open, but also quite self-assured.
Yeah, the term wake-up call has been overused for a number of years now, and every time people say Europe has gotten that wake-up call, they're now no longer in denial, and nostalgia is no longer a strategy and a viable option. As a former Prime Minister of a European Union country, do you think that's compatible and in line with the reality we're seeing? Do Europeans really understand what political environment we operate in these days?
Yeah, I think they do. And that is because I think today people understand that no one is immune for fragility or for instability. You can think that any place in the world, you can be a prosperous country, and you can think that you can build a wall around your community and you should be fine. Everyone knows that's not the case. I mean, the impact of the war in Ukraine, the main impact was on food, and not just in the European continent. I mean, that impact was almost worldwide, and we all know what the consequences of pandemics and others are. But even on the economic side, look, if you look at the projections of the World Bank and the IMF, projections for worldwide growth are the lowest since 1960. That is for a number of reasons, but one of them is just a general instability. When you are in an unstable world, an unpredictable world, when it's hard to read geopolitics, then as an economic investor, you're actually quite prudent. Now, that lack of growth, we all know that the more vulnerable ones feel it immediately. I mean, a lack of growth in, let's call it, well-established redistributing social systems, we know that means that there's less to be redistributed. And in the part of the world where we, as a development organization, work, I mean, the impact of the less growth and of the cuts is, I mean, this is not theoretical. And just to give you an example, between 2000 and 2024, child mortality has been halved worldwide. Unseen. Humanity has never, ever done that. Last year, it went back up. Why did it go back up? It's quite clear. Less money going to vaccination. Less money is going to vaccination. Well, the most vulnerable ones feel the brunt of that. And it's going up, and you could expect, if these cuts are continuing, that in that domain, the impact will go into millions of people, and especially young people and children. That does not mean that the budget cuts, and we can talk more about it, have to be something that there is no alternative for it. There's actually quite some changes in the development system that could happen, that could compensate that. But certain things you need public money for. And so the cuts in public spending have an impact.
Yeah, and money certainly in this regard very vital, and the threat on the part of Washington and the White House to cut further spending on the United Nations and its various agencies certainly does not make your life easier, for sure. And it's interesting that you say we need to rethink security. It's no longer through hard military wear, but quite on the contrary, it encapsulates many, many different elements. Development, in your particular case, is not a charity, you said. It's actually part of hard security. Explain.
Totally. Well, look, you cannot drone yourself out of every problem in the world. Airstrikes are not the solution for everything. And I fully respect the fact that there is more military spending. Look, there's a reason for it. We understand that reasoning, and I think that's fine. I mean, especially on the European side, it's totally defendable. But you can do all the military interventions you want, or all the military deterrence you want. If the places that matter to you, if their institutions are collapsing, if your youth is jobless, if your population is futureless, you will just perpetuate instability, and you create an environment which is extremely hard to stabilize. And that is related to security and to development, and development only happens when you have a certain level of stability. But it's also linked to other things. I mean, today, for example, the major factor of instability in the Western Balkans is organized crime. And it's transnational organized crime. Transnational organized crime thrives in environments where institutions are weak, thrives in environments where part of the population sees no future. That's, by the way, the same in Latin America. I mean, the transnational criminal drug trade has an incredibly hard impact. And so when I say that development and security, or development and stability, are intimately linked, I mean, this is not a theoretical, it's not a theoretical concept. What we see in organized crime is a very direct one. And also, if you see these success stories today in stabilizing, let's look at Iraq today. Iraq is slowly getting stabilized. One of the reasons why it is because 4 million IDPs, these are internally displaced people, returned to their communities. Why did they return to their communities? That's because school systems, healthcare systems, governance systems were being rebuilt. If you have an environment where people are discriminated, where governments or services are not being provided, that erodes trust. And if trust is being eroded, you create an environment where insecurity can thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the examples that you have provided, very stark and quite self-evident. So the cost of doing nothing, if I understand you correctly, is actually much higher at the end of the day.
It is, if I can add, and there's a representative of the One campaign here, who actually have, I don't know where I put this little thing you gave me, basically made the calculation, I'm sorry. So this is a dollar bill, but on the back, it explains that if you look at the OECD countries, the amounts being spent on defense is 7-for-1, defense versus diplomacy and development. The story is not that there should be less on defense. The story is with marginal increases in development and diplomacy. I mean, these are quite small amount if you compare it to defense. Your defense dollars will be more productive.
Yeah, very interesting. So defense really, in capitals, that development you have to see as a first line of defense then?
Yes. Yeah, so development is a first line of defense, or to stay in military terminology, it's the ultimate preemptive strike. Yeah. And why do you do a preemptive strike? It's to prevent a crisis. Development is the preemptive strike. It's what you do to stabilize environments, to create a future. And I'm not saying that these interventions are always successful. I mean, certain conflicts start due to other reasons. But at least it is proven that it has a positive impact.
Because the cost of doing nothing, if I hear you correctly, is instability, is more migrations, lost markets. It's pretty much a chain reaction that at the end of the day will still backfire and cost us more.
Totally. And as I said, no one is immunized for that. I mean, you can be the most wealthy country in the world. One way or another, it impacts you. And in the end, if not by insecurity, it impacts you because of lower growth, less trade, and so on.
Yeah, you make perfect and very logical arguments here. Obviously, on the stage, I think arguments very few, if any, here in the audience would disagree. Why do you think Washington, then? Why do you think the current US administration is finding so hard to accept the premises that you laid out here today?
You know, the initial message from Washington was, you know, we don't want to have, I mean, very, very critical to the UN system and basically saying, you know, there's not going to be any funding at all. But you now see that, for example, Tom Fletcher, who's the head of OCHA, and OCHA is the kind of the coordinating mechanism for everything which is humanitarian help, actually got quite a few billions from the American administration, from the Trump administration. There's a few reasons for that. One of it is he did quite some reorganization. I think he gave a clear message like, look, part of the criticism, we get it. And that is also my answer. I mean, part of the criticism on the fact that United Nations have become too bloated, too slow, is not adapted to this world where speed is of the essence. I think you have to take some of that criticism. So part of his answer was less. I got the message, I'm doing the reforms. Second element is that, yeah, he was been pretty good at explaining, well, you know, if you don't stabilize Sudan, if you don't stabilize certain parts of the world, you know, it will have an impact on you. And I think the American business community actually responded by saying, well, you know, we have some activities and we would be better off if things are stabilized. So I actually believe in the power of persuasion, and I hope I'm pretty good at it.
Well, well, if the yes, by all means, if the US decides to withhold support from the UN and its various agencies, we're looking, of course, then at a new coalition of the willing. Speaking of the title here, rebuilding multilateralism, bringing together then a set of countries and regions that do believe in the system and see its values. Where do you see those coalitions falling?
I think it is, if you take, and I think there's a big difference between development and aid. These are two different things. I mean, aid is sometimes necessary, but to me really is in a humanitarian context. Development obviously is way broader. Development happens when there is stability. We talked about the security component to it. But it also happens when there is economic growth. Economic growth comes when you have rule of law, when you have a stable fiscal system, when your financial system is well established. Then you attract foreign direct investment. You create an environment in which local small entrepreneurs can come. And I believe that there's been a lot of talking about how the private sector needs to play a role in development. Today, it is really not at the outskirts. It's at the core. And the potential for us as an organization to create the circumstances where those investments can take place. Because today, if we talk about sub-Saharan Africa, I mean, fundamentally, these are very attractive places to invest. The demographics are great. These are young populations, entrepreneurial spirit, and huge needs. And there is more investable capital than ever. I mean, this is not global wealth. This is capital that is sitting in investment funds that is actually looking for a decent return. And I'm not against a decent return. That bridge between that capital and those places which should be attractive for investment, that is not happening today. Why is it not happening? Because of risk, but also because of perceived risk. The difference between real risk and perceived risk is, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, quite big. This is something that you can solve, but also because certain components of a stable environment are not there. That's feasible. I mean, that is our bread and butter. This is what we do as an organization. These are the reforms that need to happen. So if you talk about what are the new partners, I mean, the new partners to me is way broader than the public spending. By the way, already before the cuts in public spending in development is what we call ODA, Overseas Development Assistance. Remittances, which is basically diaspora sending money back to families, that was in volume already 3 times more important. And foreign direct investment is 10 times more important. So ODA was never the only element. But since it is shrinking, we have to be extremely careful on where we use it. Use it as catalytic as much as possible, but also know that there are certain pockets where private investment is never going to play a role. I mean, the basic healthcare, governance reforms to help democracies. Private sectors are not doing that. By the way, we don't want the private sector to finance democracy, right? So there are certain things where public funding really is the only way of doing it.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. You lay out very convincing arguments, but it remains to be seen at a time when we're seeing multilateralism rather eroding and great power politics returning. It'll be interesting to see how things play out. Being very mindful of the time as we are running out. Once again, you were Prime Minister, obviously, of Belgium, came with lots of political experience into this new job as UNDP administrator. What can you bring, what have you brought in as a former leader into this role that benefits the UNDP today?
I don't know, I mean, you'll judge me at the end how successful I was, but one of the things that I want to bring is that the development discussion becomes part of the global geopolitical debate. The global geopolitical debate is dominated by the topics we just discussed. I mean, insecurity, military spending, and so on. The instability, the drug trade, the migration flows, which are hard to manage. All these things, they're symptoms. They're symptoms of an underlying problem. And the underlying problem is lack of development, precarity, is income gaps, which are too big. And so making that part of the discussion, this should be a topic at the G7 discussions. This should be a topic at G20. We're extremely happy to get this stage here and to have that topic. That is something where I want to have a go at. Will I succeed? Well, you'll judge me afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you just took on this position only 2 months ago, but I can already see by the passion and truly the emotions that you have laid out here today that you full-heartedly believe in this mission and that you're going to be leading it with a great deal of conviction.
If I can say, I mean, I'm in this. I have the luxury to do something I'm passionate about, but all of us, one way or another, have a role to play in this. I mean, if this is mostly many of you will be active in German or European business community or wherever in the world. There is a choice to be made. Where do you want to invest? And if I can lose the last 20 minutes, I mean, this part of the world where we are very active, this is Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and so on. I mean, do the analysis on what the business opportunity is. And other places of the world seems to be less friendly for, let's say, European investment. Take a good look at the rest.
I think the message is very well received here. We very much appreciate your time, your leadership. Best of luck in this new role. 2 months is not a long time, but it's very clear. It's very clear, Alexander Kroh, from having listened to you just for 20 minutes, that you are in it with all your heart and your passion, and with you, wish you nothing but the best. Alexander De Croo, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.